let me quickly jump into the discussion, actually. Let's start the conversation with, Mr. Mathur. He's here from ISA. First of all, to begin with, you're somebody who has looked at the energy sector in India for a long time, and you have keenly looked at the solar industry too, and the related aspects of energy efficiency, etc., energy transition. What I want to ask you is, if I were to ask you to do, a dispassionate analysis of the kind of solar growth story that we have had so far, what are the two things that you would say stand out as achievements, and what are the two things that you would say, may require, a bit of a work there? Yeah. Thank you.
Sudheer, this is a very difficult question. ये जो numbering होती है ना 2 and 2, this is always difficult. So
you can choose one on one, let's say.
Let me say that one of the good things about the Indian story has been our willingness to learn and therefore change. So things that are a problem today may not be a problem tomorrow because things keep changing. But that one thing which has been a great success, and Mani and her team helped us identify these kinds of successes, is the process that we have used to de-risk the model for large solar farms. So obviously what we hear about is the reverse auctions, but there's a lot that goes before it: finding the space, getting the evacuation infrastructure, sometimes even the power purchase agreements. In other words, it almost becomes plug and play for the developer. This is something we have done well. This is something that we look forward to working with the rest of the world on. Clearly, I think we are possibly amongst the world leaders, if not amongst the best, as far as large solar farms is concerned. The second thing that I think we have learned, in this, I would highlight the fact that as far as large solar farms is concerned, reducing risks has been one of the key things that we have done. But the second issue that I will suggest that we have done well is on how, with changes, we have now started seeing an increase in the solar rooftops. For many, many years, we did not see any movement, and that, Sudheer, immediately makes me jump to point number one of what we haven't done well, which is the fiscal situation of the distribution companies. Because at the end of the day, we are dependent on the distribution companies for providing electricity to the end user. They buy from the solar producers, from rooftops. And the question has always been, the distribution company says, what is in it for me? I actually lose because you are selling me electricity. The rooftop is selling me electricity when I don't need it, say in the afternoon or early morning. And you are buying electricity from me when everybody needs it, in the evening. This means that you are exacerbating my problem of fiscal losses. We need to find an answer, and I think in finding the answer that we go somewhere near the ARR cost of procurement of power by the distribution company for the rate at which they buy, and somewhere close to what the tariffs are for the price at which they will sell. That kind of then makes the distribution company comfortable with this. This is a learning, again, that I think we need to take to the rest of the world. The only other point, Sudheer, that I leave you with is what we haven't done till now is develop devices that can help with cooking. Cooking, we have moved to LPG, but in LPG, even in rural areas, we have found that while the connection was there, refills were not happening. In every district of India, 10 to 30% of people are unable to pay anything. They depend on collected biomass. Sushanta, I think you addressed this issue of the issue of cooking. Consequently, we need to bring in energy efficiency in an induction stove, we need to bring in solar power into powering the electric stove, induction stove, and we need batteries so that it can be used when the power is there. Then you can provide this either through sale or through an incentive program to users who can then use it across the board. That is an area where we have not yet focused on as much as we should have. So it's been a very long answer to your relatively short question.
Thank you. No, but very relevant. In fact, I was talking to Ma'am Dhawan also in the morning about solar cooking, and India has had some bit of experience there, right? Many decades ago, didn't work out well, I'm told. But then, so that's a matter of analysis. Let me turn to Ma'am Khurana here, Mr. Mathur talked about discoms. One of the things that I personally, watch out for whenever there's commentary from World Bank on India's energy sector, there are 2-3 things that stand out. First of all, of course, World Bank has been with us for a long time, right? It's one of those early stage, investors in India's energy sector. But it also, whenever it gets the opportunity, highlights the issue of discoms. There's ill financial health, etc., and it's a very well-known story. Where do you think we stand on that right now? Have things improved? In what way? Over what period of time? What's the current assessment of the discom health?
Thank you.
And the reason why I'm asking that is because it's very critically linked to solar. Yeah.
Okay, a very good morning, everyone. Actually, yeah, good morning till now. So that is a tough question because it is, as Sir said, it's the weakest link in our power sector, the distribution sector. There's no doubt about it. You may generate through the coal power plants or through renewable energy. Ultimately, where the money comes from is the distribution sector. Now, since 1990s, there have been enough schemes, there have been enough reforms. There have been mixed results. And we can very clearly say that obviously all states are not alike. But when you really see, have we found a solution to the problem? Are we sustainable when it comes to distribution sector? Unfortunately, we are not. Now, so I think in FY21, the distribution losses were around $10 billion, out of which 70% were from 6 states. That has a huge impact. We have to understand very clearly that we may have enough schemes for improving the operational and financial efficiency of the distribution companies, but till that happens, there will be a problem of the generators getting paid and transmission companies still they have a set return. So, and the government has obviously taken it very seriously, and we've seen the RDSS scheme, which has come. So we have seen other schemes. I think this scheme actually has more teeth in the sense there are results which have to be achieved. There were action plans which were prepared by every state, which was then seen by the cabinet. They were approved by the cabinet, and then they were approved by MOP. They have targets which have to be achieved, and if they achieve those annual targets, the money is paid. So I think we are moving in the right direction, but there's a long way to go. Having said that, there was also a scheme which was announced last year on the late payment surcharge. I think that will help as well. But we have a long way to go. And I have actually worked with the distribution companies in a number of states. And World Bank is currently working around in 10 different states. And we are also partnering with Government of India on the RDSS scheme, where we will be partnering with 2 to 3 states and helping them meet those targets which have been set. It's not easy. It's a mindset change. You have to get IT solution, the smart metering, which is a crucial part of the RDSS. If it has to be done, at that point of time, you have to do major capacity building of all the distribution personnel. You also have to look at the IT system. So it's a long journey, but I think we are moving in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. A very relevant comment there. Let me turn to Mr. Chatterjee. We've got a slight perspective from a funding agency here. We've got a perspective from ISA. I want to understand from you as a regulator, right? A lot of times we tend to say that India's solar power sector has grown significantly. It's a success story, etc. What is the regulatory perspective there? If you can take us briefly through, what are the key regulations that have shaped that have helped us shape that growth story, and where do we stand today as a regulator?
Yeah. Good morning once again to everybody. Still just at the border, So, and thanks for inviting me. And of course, yes. I think it's a very generic kind of a question, but let me try and give regulatory perspective on solar. Today, I think everybody talks profusely about solar, the success story and all that, but I would like to take you back to 2009-10, when for the first time the investors approached the regulators asking for one simple thing. They said, see, what we don't have is one reference price which one can refer to and set up a project, and no one was sure as to what that reference price should be. And as central regulator, we took initiative and we came up with a very high price. We were subjected to criticism at that time. 17 rupees, to be specific, 17 rupees 14 paise was the first reference or generic tariff that we came up for solar. I would say that was the starting point of the solar journey that we are talking about today. Not that many projects came with this price, this tariff, but then we give a signal, and in fact, over the period from 2009-10 up to 2015, we kept on coming up with the generic tariff for solar, and gradually Government of India came up with a reverse auction policy, which really made a lot of progress for solar to come up. But in those reverse auction, Government of India used CRC tariff as a benchmark tariff, against which they asked the investors to quote discounts. And the whole journey started with this. So that was one important regulatory intervention, in my opinion, which played a very important role, because any new technology that you talk about, you need some clarity in terms of the cost that you could recover, some clarity in terms of the for the investors as well as for the buyers. You would find buyers difficult to be convinced to start with, but as you go along, you give a signal, economies of scale come, and then the prices fall down. So that was one important intervention from the regulatory side. During this period, another important thing that possibly we did, and which is now being done by the Government of India, because the costs were so high, we also, introduced this concept of waiver of transmission charges, because the capacity utilization factor of solar being so low, at that time we also gave a broad number, 19% as the CUF, which was quite new to this whole system. So the transmission cost, if you go by the traditional principle of determining the transmission cost, the cost would go 4 times higher, 5 times higher, because your capacity utilization factor is only 19 to 20%. So, so we, in fact, in a way, introduced for a year or so waiver of interstate transmission and charges at that, and losses as well. Over a period of time, Government of India has carried forward that policy. And the third important thing, which is more recent, which I would like to highlight, there are plethora of regulatory interventions, but a couple of important interventions which have shaped the growth story of renewable in general and solar in particular. The third important point is what we are talking in terms of the aggregated, the pooling station concept, the forecasting, scheduling, has been a big issue and concern. The wind and solar generators have been telling us that we are so infirm in nature, we cannot be subjected to mandatory forecasting and scheduling, but then there is resistance from the distribution companies. Because at the end of the day, there is no free lunch. If you are deviating, if you are not able to forecast well, the cost of the errors that you have in your forecasting is borne by the distribution companies who are already in the red, as Dr. Mathur already highlighted. So we created this concept of pooling of the wind and solar into a pooling station. This concept, this helped reduce the error to a great extent. It's still being debated as to whether we can have pooling of pooling substations to reduce the impact of deviation on them. But then we also created some framework for forecasting, scheduling, and deviation settlement, which is in a way which seeks to balance the interests of the distribution companies as well as the solar investors. Because only coming up with a regulation which gives you free SOPs does not help, because then the local distribution companies, you create some sort of resistance in the local distribution companies, and they start creating tariff and non-tariff barriers, which does not serve your purpose in the interest. So of the plethora of regulatory interventions, these are the three important things which I thought I'll highlight to start with, and I stop here and will be happy to respond to further questions.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chatterjee. A lot seems to have been done on regulatory side, and a lot seems to have been done on policy side too, as far as solar growth is concerned. And despite that, we a lot of our industry CEOs say that there is a certain lack of clarity when it comes to giving from the government side when it comes to giving the right signals to the industry is concerned. And one such CEO is Mr. Iyer, Srivatsan Iyer. Mr. Iyer, if you can, I hope you can hear me clearly.
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay. So let me ask you, you've often talked about how we need a more consistent, policy approach to development of renewable energy projects and solar in particular. What exactly are you talking about? Are you talking about the import duty and BCD LMM kind of issues, or you think there is something more there? Yeah.
Yeah, I think first I'd like to echo what some of the other speakers already said in terms of what works really well in India and what India has done well in its journey. And I think a large part of that is the positive policy environment that's been created over the last decade to make sure that solar and wind can grow and that private investors can actually invest in this sector and still be comfortable with the returns. I'd like to highlight potentially two areas from a policy standpoint. One is consistency, and that consistency across the country. Now, it is a complicated problem, and given that the states have their own regulations and potentially their own constraints and needs as well. However, if you were to take the open access and the group captive type policy framework that was created, which is actually really positive, and I would argue is going to be a critical component of how India starts to decarbonize its electricity network. But each state has its own interpretation of what that means and how to potentially pick holes in it and how to potentially even create barriers. And I think we already heard in terms of how the DISCOMs can create certain tariff and non-tariff barriers. And so that's one area that we're really looking for is consistency across how these policies are interpreted and implemented across the country. Now, as an industry, we're not necessarily asking for them all to be favorable, but we're just asking them to be consistent. That way we don't have ambiguity, we don't have uncertainty. And the other one is really consistency over time. In other words, when we invest, put all the investment up front, and then the returns are really predicated on cash flows over the next 25 years. And so what really happens is after you make the investment, if policy frameworks start to change or the interpretation of the policy starts to change, that has a huge impact on the financial return. And that really is one of the barriers for investors, private investors, especially coming in and investing in this sector. There's multiple examples of these. Certainly, there was something. We heard some comments about the forecasting and the DSM methodology. Other ones have to do with reactive power guidelines, and now certainly we've been hearing a lot about the GIB issue and the undergrounding of cables. A lot of these, if they're grandfathered into earlier projects, really have a negative impact on how those projects actually do. But more importantly, they have a negative impact in terms of how future investors look to invest in this segment. To say, look, I'm putting in money today, but what's the guarantee that 2 years from now the rules of the game won't change? And so again, as I said, there's a lot of positive in the policy framework. If we had to kind of tweak it and say what we're really looking for, I'd say, again, consistency across the country and consistency over time.
Thank you, Sri. Let me say that, so you're basically saying that there's a lot of, we have to deal with, as an industry, we have to deal with a lot of lack of consistency or lack of clarity, etc. But then there are ways and means which the government uses to also give, a clear signal to the industry from policy, as far as policy is concerned. For example, we recently had the, we got to know that the ALMM issue is being taken care of. It has been kept in abeyance till FY24. So perhaps there is, so perhaps there is, there's a need to look at that issue with a, with a fresh angle, perhaps. Anyway, so thanks for that comment, Sri. Let me turn to Mr. Viswanathan. You're a major player in the CNI segment, and that's one of the areas which within solar which are coming up significantly, right? A lot of the private companies who talk to, they tell us that perhaps as compared to utility, CNI is picking up and has picked up significantly. It has its own challenges, no doubt, but then it's a lucrative area, right? So what exactly, as far as offsite CNI is concerned, what are the new business models that are emerging there, and what are the key factors for success, if you can tell us that?
So thanks. So Vibrant Energy is a corporate renewables focused platform. And I would say right now what we're seeing is there is a lot of, I think a lot has been said around policy and the need for clarity around policy. One of the big takeaways that we see today is that the government is very serious of making the electricity sector market-based. So, which is why you're actually creating, allowing large corporate developers to build projects on ISTS and CTU, being able to trade it on exchange. A lot of clarity around GNA, and thank you, sir, for all the hard work on that. I think there's been a phenomenal amount of work, and I think what Ajay sir was also mentioning, there has been a very keen ear to what the developers have been constantly asking for every day, every conference, and there has been a lot of actions on that, and a lot of welcome action. And I think the undercurrent of everything is we are sitting on a very strong transmission network, which is not available in many developed nations as well, due to which we can actually dream of a world where we can deliver 30 to 40 gigawatt every year without putting the grid in major danger. But having said that, I'm going to take the privilege of what you said, Ajay sir, that there's a listening, and there are certain action that we think in terms of being able to move forward very quickly. See, point number one, in terms of there is a huge opportunity that we are still yet to tap into. The singular goal for all of us is to hit 40 to 50 gigawatt every year to hit our 300 gigawatt pipeline. And irrespective, there are competing forces, there are competing interests at hand, but at the end of the day, our actions have to be much faster, and given the urgency that is up in front of us. Point number one, we talked about ALMM. Right now, we've been discussing about ALMM for the longest time because we don't have modules. Of course, we would love to have all the modules internally and domestically, but through that transition, we will have to bring all the capacity into the country to be able to do that. But even the ALMM that has come in is actually puts a deadline of March 24th. So essentially, if I am able to commission a plant in 9 months, can I commission a 500 megawatt plant in 9 months? No. So I really don't get opportunity to extend that ALMM. So that's another short-sighted policy intervention I hope that would have taken a 2-year policy rather than a 9-month kind of action. Then there is this, that's on that. I mean, in terms of one of the things that Sir talked about, forecasting, scheduling. Of course, we had a lot of infirm power, right? And it's very hard to forecast. In some of my projects right now during monsoon, I gave a forecast of 35 megawatt, and the next day there was black clouds and my plant ran at 0 megawatt. I took a huge DSM penalty over there. Now, one of the fundamental logics that we need to do is to build a very strong ancillary market, allow massive storage to come into the system. Do not run storage as a L1 tender. Create a feed-in tariff mechanism for storage, so I can go and set up a 10 megawatt hour outside every SLDC, and you pay me for whatever grid stability I'm giving you. So that's one big ask that I think we should do it, and we will be able to solve all the forecasting issues and DSM issues and everything else. We can give you a round-the-clock forecasting, and we will not deviate more than 5%. And then the last part is in terms of business models. One of the other things is globally, if you see, every business model is based on CNI. The global markets which are doing 30, 50 megawatts are mostly CNI based models. And one of the big business model is contract for differences, because a wholesale customer is able to get the best price. And today we are unfortunately situated in a market where we have a lot of subsidies that need to be provided. But irrespective of that, there are beautiful schemes that the government has brought about in terms of Kisan Rojna and Kusum scheme, where we can decouple all of that. But the CFD issue has been sitting for a longer time, and unfortunately, Sir, SEBI and CRC are waiting to see who is going to decide. I would love all of you to get into a room and just take a decision, so we know where the market is going, and that could essentially hit our 300 gigawatt plan in no time. So these are some of the things that which ultimately I think the entire market is going to turn into a CNI market, not necessarily a L1 tender market. So we need to create that ecosystem now to allow all developers, and I think some of us developer community here would share some of these things with me. And the pie is really huge. So 300 gigawatt is a huge pie. All of us will be able to do a 50, 100 gigawatt and be happy to contribute to the country. Thank you.
Thanks. I can see that you're carrying a long list of issues. But very practical issues, no doubt. Let me turn to Shashank. Shashank, you are also present very broadly in the same space. What's your list of issues? Talking about CNI, let's say.
So when it comes to CNI, I think the first issue that comes to my mind, and this is something that I think everyone has talked about. We came out with an act back in 2003, created those electricity rules around it. For some reason, the interpretation of those rules, we've not been able to get that right in these 20 years, right? Every state interprets them in a different manner. That is something that we have to get right, and I think government has taken some really positive steps towards standardization. We are looking at GNA, we are looking at green open access rules through which government is mandating the regulatory commissions to standardize stuff. Like I think banking, when it comes to CNI, banking is one of the aspects that developers are looking at, right? And right now, from no banking to yearly banking, we have all sorts of policies. Now, what the recent green open access rules have done is they've sort of standardized that minimum 1 month banking has to be there. We are hopeful that all states are going to adopt it, and we have minimum 1 month banking, right? So apart from that, so this I believe is a major issue. Standardization is something that we should be looking at, not only in the open access space, but also in the rooftop space, right? Others are, of course, very, very operational issues, and I believe they are more around getting policy equilibrium, right? The government or the regulator is sort of looking at developers, is also looking at discoms, is also looking at consumers. As Sir mentioned, you can't have a only SOPs policy which only favors developers. You can't have something which only favors consumers. policy equilibrium. I think it's high time we should sort of have that equilibrium. Discoms will have to come to they'll have to accept that renewables is a reality now. It's as Victor Hugo said, it's an idea whose time has come. We can't live without it. It's important for our energy independence. And sort of adopt certain minimum criteria to help industry thrive. ALMM, BCD, all those things, all these things will keep coming, but we'll soon settle on them. But the major thing is getting the regulatory stuff right.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Shashank. And that's very well said. But let me turn to Mr. Mathur again. So there's a lot of spotlight on ISA, right? And I want to understand, and I'm sure a lot of us sitting here would want to understand, specifically what is the kind of work, if you can share some of the highlights there that is being done currently, in the sense that so ISA is supposed to have done a lot of contribution, not just to Indian but the larger global scene when it comes to large scale rapid deployment of solar projects or capacity or investments. How do you exactly look at it? What are the top ways in which ISA has helped the globe and India reach closer and closer to that ultimate goal of rapid solar deployment?
Sudheer, you'll give me like 5 hours.
No, there's a reason why I asked. I kept that question open-ended, right, and very broad and generic in nature. Because it's a very important topic, and let's get the basics right. Yeah.
Okay. So, we are a group of 114 countries as of now, and about one country joins us every 2 weeks, so 2 a month. We want that in all our member countries, solar becomes the energy source of choice in all our countries. How do we do this? We do this by 3 strategies: advocacy and the information that goes with it, by ensuring that there is enough capacity in the countries to be able to set up solar, and by helping create the institutions through which things like bidding for large solar farms or the regulations for solar mini grids, etc., can occur. Let me spend a couple of minutes on each one of them. We believe advocacy is very important, especially in an area like solar, where there are new things happening almost every day. So, for example, from last year, we were bringing out an annual a publication which tracks the progress in solar technologies, solar investments, and solar markets. So that if you are a country or a company which wants to move in solar, here is the information as of now. And by doing this every year, we keep on top of it. That's number one. There are other things that we do, like provide information on ease of doing solar. One of the very important issues that we are looking at right now is how do you geographically diversify the manufacturing base across the world, so that as the demand increases in the years to come, we are looking at a 3 to 10 times increase by 2030. We see the demand being, the supply being also spread over the world rather than coming through particular supply chains and particular logistics, which then have a potential for being choked. This is as far as the advocacy work is concerned. The second is capacity building. Every political leader says, okay, if I'm convinced that solar is the way to go, who will do it? Because one of the key things that every political leader looks for is that there is local capacity across the solar chain. So they are looking at manufacturing in the country, they are looking at installation in the country, they are looking at ensuring that the financing is done by local banks and so on. This is the goal. Now, obviously, the first thing that is needed is people. And as you look at people, we therefore provide the certification that is needed for the people who can work on the projects. So if you're a developer and you go to a country, you should be able to find certified people who you can employ. That is the goal. And therefore, very close linkage with the kinds of things that the country is doing about projects and the programs that we offer. We found, for example, that there was a huge demand from bankers to learn about solar technology. Something like 2,000 bankers have already been through programs that we have carried out on telling them about solar technology. Now they come back to us and say, we want to see how assessments can be done. How can risk assessments be done? Because solar obviously is very different. Most of the cost is first cost. And therefore, the loan is a lot more, has got a lot more exposure to vulnerabilities regarding the performance of the technology. This is something that we are working on. And the third part is holding hands in institution building. I, for one, and ISA in general, believes that policies follow projects, not the other way around. So the first issue is hold the hands of the countries in doing the projects. In a very large number of countries, they've asked us to help them in putting solar projects into the market. Total is about 10 gigawatts of projects. How do we do it? We work with them in creating a project management cell. It could be done by a local company, it could be done by an Indian organization. NTPC, for example, holds PMCs in about, I think, 12 countries, if I'm not wrong. And then develop the DPR, develop the documents that go with the RFP, do the bidding, so that the country can then go for a second project, a fifth project, and a 100th project without the need for always asking for international help. We do realize that funding is an issue. In fact, it's a huge issue. You know, Sudheer, last year, something like $250 billion came into the solar sector globally. 250 billion. This is a large number. It compares favorably with the amount of money that came into the solar sector into the electricity generation sector at the peak of the fossil fuel boom. But only 5% of it went to Africa. Why? This is the place which is the best solar insolation. This is the place where the largest energy demand growth is occurring. We talked to investors. And what we found was that there was a huge degree of at least the perception that they would not get their money back. And therefore, providing confidence that they would get their money back was important. So the Solar Alliance has started the process of creating a solar facility which provides a payment guarantee mechanism, very much like the Solar Energy Corporation of India does. What we hope that this will do, and there are allied things like having a pool of seed capital from various development banks, so that when the private sector comes in with its money, you mix it with the development bank money and bring down the cost of capital. All of this, therefore, increases the confidence of the private sector to invest in this area when it is allied with the other changes. There is capacity, there is regulatory changes happening. In other words, create the atmosphere that projects happen now and will be followed by subsequent projects as well. So, Sudheer, it's been a very long answer to a relatively short question, but it's less than 5 hours.
No, thanks. Thanks for that answer. If I can ask a follow-up question. So this regional imbalance in the allocation of funds or distribution of funds is a very, I mean, it's a problem, no doubt. But then as a solution to the problem, we had worked out that risk assessment framework also. What is the current status? Where are we on that? Can you brief us on that?
Sure. So as far as the solar facility is concerned, it is now in the process of being filled up with capital. We have had meetings and are continuing to have meetings with potential investors. We are looking at the Green Climate Fund and the GEF to provide the risk capital that is needed. We are looking at the meetings that will happen in the course of this year to decide on the funding. We are at the same time looking at private equity investors who would work with this. We have a consultant on board who's helping us design this facility because it requires deep understanding of the financial markets to be able to design such a facility. So, Sudheer, this is work in progress. And every time I meet you, I will be able to provide a little more information.
Sure, thank you, thanks. Ma'am Khurana, I want to turn to you on this. So as a funding agency, I want to understand, so solar is a great growth story for India, right? But then as a funding agency, how do you look at it? What are the chief constraints? And a lot of CEOs have talked about it. A lot of people in this panel have talked about a lot of constraints. In the light of all of that, right, if the bank is bullish on solar, what are the chief reasons and what could go wrong? Again, a tough question perhaps.
All of these are long questions and you'll get long answers. I'll try to keep it short. But first of all, World Bank per se is not it's not a bank, the usual bank. See, the idea for World Bank to come into a space would be when that market is not taking off. So when there is a new technology and the commercial financing is not coming into it, aim from what we try to do is try to analyze why aren't the projects happening, why isn't the financing coming in, and normally it's not only financing, it's the ecosystem which is also there, which has to be helped, created, so that the market takes up on its own and the commercial financing starts coming in. So when you ask me about only solar, so for us, if you really ask me, we have engaged in the solar sector and we are looking broadly at the renewable energy sector. So just to give you an example, when the solar parks weren't happening, and Dr. Mathur mentioned that, where we basically did not end up financing the solar park. What we did was we financed the shared infrastructure. Because at that point of time, the main risk that people were seeing were, will the transmission network come to evacuate the power first, or will the solar companies set up their generating stations first? So what we did was we financed the shared infrastructure, made sure it came on time, and also put in a number of things when it came to how to share the risk. And that was the Reva Solar Park, which got one of the lowest bids. So idea is to understand at different stages what is required. Going on to solar rooftop, when the market wasn't taking off, World Bank put a line of credit with State Bank of India for CNI sector. And the aim was not only to finance, but also create an enabling environment. And this is where I'll take what Dr. Mathur said, because it's exactly the same. With a new technology, you don't only need to do capacity building of the people who will install it, who will take care of it, but also of the bankers as to what is this new technology, and if this project comes on my table, how am I supposed to assess it? How will I evaluate it? How many years will it take for me to get, the money back? So the idea is to have a component of capacity building, create awareness, speak to the distribution utilities when it came to solar rooftop to make them understand what is this new technology, how, what are the processes that have to be put in place. As I'm sure all of you are well aware, when solar rooftop actually started, it was months before, the application would ever see the light of day. So all those things have to happen, and that is the enabling environment, which goes side by side with the main project that we do. So first the rooftop solar program was for the CNI sector. We started it for the residential sector as well. And what we realized was that when we put the line of credit for CNI, even though MSMEs could have taken loan from them, very few MSMEs did take the loan from SBI. What was the problem there? There was a credit history problem. So now we've put in place a risk-sharing facility for MSMEs so that they can actually also take loan for solar rooftop. Now, solar, as I said, it's moving very well. We've seen good examples. But I think the new market which will come up with the new technology that we are trying to focus on is offshore wind. Offshore wind has huge potential in India. But obviously, whenever new technology comes, the prices will be high, so everyone is skeptical about it. There's also enabling environment which has to be set up, because we are talking about sizes of those windmills which haven't been seen so far. It's creating a new industry. So that is something that is being done. And then after renewable energy, and we spoke about it, how do you integrate renewable energy in the system? So the next new technology that again we are looking at is battery storage. Integration of renewable energy through pump storage, through battery storage, that is where it's really important. And I completely agree with the gentleman when you said about battery storage, because I think again the cost is the issue. We all know we need battery storage in the system, but the question is how do we monetize the different value streams that battery storage has?
Yeah, thank you. You haven't mentioned green hydrogen in this entire list. Why? I mean, we had Nina Fenton here in the morning from EIB, and EIB made that announcement last month saying $1 billion commitment for green hydrogen in India, right? And that kind of talks about how bullish these funding agencies are when it comes to that technology. Any specific reason why you didn't mention green hydrogen there?
Okay, because as we heard in the morning, green hydrogen is everywhere. But the thing is, see, green hydrogen also, I think, we have a mission in place, things are going good, but there's a long journey to take place. Green hydrogen cannot happen without renewable energy. Green hydrogen cannot happen if you do not have battery storage. So I think these are steps. Green hydrogen is the way to go, there's no doubt about that. But I think we still have to put the different elements into place and work towards green hydrogen.
Thank you. Sri, if you can hear me, I would like to turn to you here. When you made that initial comment, you were talking about those, issues of lack of policy, consistency, etc. But you were also saying that there's a lot of good work that has happened. Now, as an investor, so we know that, HFE has a mega and a huge expansion plan when it comes to capacity creation, investment plan, etc. I want to understand, despite these constraints, how bullish the company is on, investments in solar. What is the larger plan we are working on? And, now the government is indicating that, it's looking at these issues that are being talked about. So from that point of view, what specifically are the, let's say, top 2 issues that you would want addressed? Yeah.
Yep, thank you. Absolutely. So number one, I think at Hero Future Energies, we are very bullish about renewable energy in India. The potential is enormous, not just because of the targets we've set for ourselves by 2030, but just the overall ecosystem and the framework in place, I think really is there for the sector to grow. And I think one of the speakers even mentioned, the size of the pie is so large, right? We need a lot of the private sector to jump in and make sure that it happens. So a couple of the things that look really favorable going forward. One is, I think, if you look at some of the tenders and the bids that are coming out from SECI and from the states as well, these are starting to be beyond just the plain vanilla solar and wind. They're starting to be the peak power, which really requires solutions of hybrid with some kind of storage, potentially battery energy or pump. We're looking at round-the-clock bids that are starting to be developed. And there was a lot of discussion on the forecasting and DSM, and one of the speakers did mention battery storage. And we're seeing that happening as well. When I say battery storage, standalone battery storage tenders. There was a recent one that just closed in Kerala. There was a SECI one that just closed, and we're now looking at least 3 or 4 other states coming up with battery energy storage. Because as renewable energy increases its share of the total electricity supply, you're going to have to need some kind of a storage mechanism to make sure that you meet the needs through the peak power and, or really round the clock, and that you make sure that you can deal with the intermittency that's absolutely a part of renewables. So number one, we are very excited by the fact that some of these new tenders are coming up, and we certainly look forward to those as well. And the second one is, I think, if any effort that India makes to meet its decarbonization goals or even its RE goals by 2030, which is a near-term goal, will require the to step up. And so we are quite, again, bullish about the CNI sector, especially large projects, the open access type projects, and that is looking to grow now as you're seeing more and more certainly news about the large corporates tying up larger and larger capacity projects for their own needs and for their captive needs. And so these are the two areas that we look at, and we're pretty sure that that's going to grow, and we look forward to participating in those.
Okay.
In terms of some of the issues, I think clearly, and I'll mention just one because we've talked about transmission distribution. Fortunately, there's a good roadmap ahead. We've certainly talked about DISCOM's financial strength, and we hope that stabilizes over time. But the big one in the near term, and potentially, even the mid to long term, unless we have more clarity on it, is the whole, I'd say, the trade-off between becoming self-sufficient in module manufacturing in India, and so not being captive to, I'd say, global supply chains, whether it be supply chain disruptions or geopolitics, and the need to make sure that we don't slow down the pace of implementation. And these are two competing needs in the near term, but in the midterm, they could play out as well. So some kind of clarity around the ALMM BCD framework in terms of when it's going to apply, how long it's going to apply, and the level to which it's going to apply. Because again, as I said, there are in the near term competing needs, even though in the long term you'd say, or mid to long term you'd say, India as a country does need a robust manufacturing supply chain in India for modules. Albeit, I'll say it needs it all the way from the beginning till the end. So it's just polysilicon all the way to the end, and not just module assembly, which really doesn't address any of the concerns of domestic manufacturing, but does throw up several barriers to developers such as us. So I'd really point out that as the primary one, in addition to the other structural ones that have been discussed over the years.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Sri. Mr. Chatterjee, I want to ask you at this point, we are discussing solar, which is part of the larger energy transition story, right? What exactly, so when a nation like India goes through energy transition, it's a very complex process, right? In the sense that various competing technologies are there, and their own, pace of growth is very different. So there's a lot of, there are a lot of imponderables, right? So how difficult does it make the life of a regulator? Right, that's one thing that I want to understand. What is, or if you can share something, let's say from the international experience of countries who would have done it before us, can you share some things, on that front for us to be able to better understand that?
Yeah, thank you. The regulator's job is always very difficult because the only job that we have is to balance the interests of various stakeholders. Right here, even here, there are demands. Which I am taking forward, I am carrying with me. So there are always competing demands. Like I said right at the outset, what we did and took credit of having come up with a very high generic tariff, 17 rupees 14 paise. But we also got a lot of flags from various quarters at that time. We waived interstate transmission charges. DISCOMs blamed us, saying that there is no free lunch. Ultimately, that has to be borne by us. So, but we knew we had to balance the interests, and we knew that not that 100 gigawatt was going to come with 17 rupees 14 paise, but then you need to give that signal. So that's a real challenge that a regulator faces whenever it understands the advantage with the regulator, especially the central regulator, that it's a knowledge-based organization. It keeps undertaking a lot of research before coming up with any regulations. So we have some vision in mind, but then implementation becomes a big challenge. And when you talk about energy transition, it's a big story beyond what we are discussing, focused only on renewable. But a couple of examples that I would give, I mean, whenever we talk about transition, energy transition, especially promoting, not only promoting renewable, but seeking to make your, or reduce emissions, like, I mean, environmental norms that have come. They have a direct impact on the cost for a consumer, because when you talk about FGD installations, I mean, several petitions come before us, we have to give approval, and based on that they go and set up that, but then that has a cost. So equity issue becomes quite critical. I mean, all that you talk in terms of the SOPs that you need to give to the renewable generators or technologies like that, the cost ultimately have to be borne by the distribution company who are already in the red. So how do you balance the interest? How do you take them on board as you go along is a real challenge for a regulator. And the most important thing that we are trying to focus on is on creating appropriate, regulatory framework for integration of this infirm power. Of course, we have been all talking about the storage, we are also trying to focus on other flexible resources which are possible. Another important thing which often gets lost sight of is the demand response. I mean, we are not only talking about the technologies from the supply side. As regulators, we are trying to encourage from the demand side. Demand response is the most efficacious, flexible resource that you can bring. And when you mentioned about the international experiences, I mean, in fact, last year in September, October, I was there in California when it witnessed, almost it was on the verge of a power failure, power cut. In their system, the peak demand went up to 52 gigawatt, which they had never imagined. And I was a witness to how the battery storage out there and demand response actually helped, and they said, because it becomes a big political issue if you do load shedding out there, so flex about. So these are some of the innovative things which are easier said than done. You need to create regulatory framework. They had demand response, but then I realized even they have a lot to learn and move forward in terms of creating the right kind of policy and regulatory framework for such balancing and flexible resources to become a mainstream force. So we as regulators are trying to learn ourselves first based on international experiences and our own experiences, and create a framework that can really have a win-win situation for both. You need all these resources. You as a country, you have set a target. You have to move in a way, but then given the constraints and the challenges that you have as a developing country, how do you balance the interests of various stakeholders becomes a very important question for any regulatory decision making. So that, I would say, is the biggest challenge that we face as regulators. And we are trying to find out solutions as we go along. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. If I can turn to Mr. Viswanathan again, and you have that list of issues. But I want to ask you, for companies like Vibrant, right, very aggressive growth plans there. You have added significant, assets in a very short period of time, backed by foreign investors. So given these issues, what does the future look like? What does the future really hold, right? So what is the strategy for growth?
I think the answer is very clear. The investors today believe in India. That's why we are seeing trillions of dollars of committed capital. One of the point is they also understand that you cannot generate returns in India unless you have a long-term mentality. This is not a market that you come in and do some projects and leave. So you will have to be a long-term investor in these markets. Go with the tide. There will be challenges. We are a democratic institution. There will be competing interests. But we also very strong institutions like CRC, APTEL. The amount of work that has gone on over the last few decades in terms of electricity matters, it's amazing. Like in such a complex industry. Now, given having said that, today India is a shining example where it's one of the only few markets that's giving growth to investors and an ability for investors to look at making returns. And obviously the opportunities that have been given to us, partly because of this listening idea, right? We have been very frank about our opinion. Regulators and government has been frank about what they are able to do. So I think this is a great opportunity for us to capitalize on. One last beat I would say is, though looking from an investor mindset, I think what's happened that today, since decarbonization is the name of the game, all countries are committing massive amount of investment. We are going to be, as India, we're going to be competing with IRA of US, Europe and other markets. So the investors will look for comparable returns in all other markets. So if we are able to take some of this hair out of the system, create more clarity and create this opportunity, I think we can be a magnet for bringing in any investment that we need for achieving our targets.
Yeah, thank you. The last question of the discussion, of course, goes to Shashank. Shashank, you're a significant player in the rooftop segment, right? And somebody in the panel said that that's an area which was traditionally not growing, but now things have started looking up there. What's your assessment? Did you agree with that? And what has improved, really speaking? And the reason why it's important is because that's the part of solar that really is going to lead to the solar revolution, so to speak, right? Because getting it right on rooftop is very, very important, right? So how have things improved, if they have? What's your assessment of that?
So Sudheer, when we started Sunsure, I remember back in 2017, the targets for rooftop were about 40 gigawatt by 2022. Right? What I know is that we've only been able to install about 6 to 7 gigawatt, and we've clearly missed that target. At Sunsure also, we've recently raised a $400 million round from a Swiss private equity, where our plans are largely around open access and large utility projects. But I mean, the reliance on rooftop is small. And I think there are a couple of reasons behind it. If you look at the customers, they are looking to displace a significant chunk of their consumption from discoms by renewable energy, cheaper power, right? Rooftop is limited by its size, right? And hence most of the organizations want to opt for open access. Now, what has also happened, and a lot of installations in rooftop, smaller ones, were happening on the capex mode. Industries were putting their own money, setting up rooftops. During COVID, because of this volatility, the prices went up, and because industries did not want to sort of put their capital to something which was not core of their business, I think rooftop installation between 20 and 22 largely stopped, right? They couldn't grow at the pace that we had thought. And rooftop is now, as I believe, is being sacrificed for larger projects. As I said, open access, you go displace 40%, rooftop can only displace 5 to 10%, right? But having said that, rooftop is an extremely important part of our ecosystem. As everyone's mentioned, grid stability, decentralized generation is something that we should be looking at, and without rooftop, that's very difficult to attain. On the policy front, like the government is sort of pushing the GNA, Green Open Access rules, on the open access side, to standardize the regulations, to standardize the interpretation of laws across the states, which is a challenge today. I think we need something like that in the rooftop segment, right? One thing, of course, was giving net metering to everyone, making net metering a right. But I think there are other challenges around rooftops. Some states do not allow you open access. If you have rooftop, you got to choose one or move to gross metering, stuff like that. I think the best thing that we can do to support the rooftop industry is to have standardization again. have one policy for the country, like we've implemented GST, one nation, one tax. I think that's what we need in the energy sector as well.
Thank you. Thanks, Shashank. And you're laying a lot of emphasis on standardization. In your earlier answer also, you were talking about that. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to an end of this wonderful discussion. Thank you for your time. Thanks.